Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux in Baltimore. We're continuing our conversation with Jamal Abdi as well as Cyrus Bina. We are talking about the Iran nuclear deal. The deadline was June 30th for a framework to come about, but now we have word that it's going to be taking a little bit longer. So I'm going to start off with you, Jamal, and I want to talk about the real winners and losers of a delay and a potential breakdown of a deal. Would it seem from a geopolitical standpoint that Israel would be happy about this delay, since we know Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he addressed Congress where he was vehemently opposed to a deal with Iran. He called it a bad deal for democracy. What's the Israeli strategy now that there's a delay?
I think this delay is going to be a short phenomenon. So I think there may be an effort to say, this is stonewalling and this or that. But at the end of the day, I'm pretty confident there's going to be a deal. But as for Israel, the political establishment in Israel has made the political decision to oppose this deal, to oppose any deal, and to offer no alternatives, which is in contrast to what the security and military establishment is saying. The Israeli Army intelligence issued a report that said a nuclear deal would actually have a net security benefit for Israel's security, which is very far out of line with what Netanyahu and other political figures are saying inside of Israel. I think that the Israeli strategy is one in which they've been boxed in because of their political leadership into opposing this deal. And I think that most of Israel's efforts are going to be focused on really trying to contain this deal and limit what they perceive as the fallout of this deal. The political opposition to an agreement by Netanyahu is less about a desire to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, because I think Netanyahu understands that this deal is actually probably the best way to do that. Netanyahu is somebody who initially opposed the interim deal that limited Iran's nuclear program, and now is saying, you know what, instead of getting a final deal, you should just extend the interim deal indefinitely. But that notwithstanding, I think that the effort is going to be one in which Netanyahu, political figures in Israel, seek to make sure that the real consequence that they view of this deal, which is that Iran starts to have a relationship potentially in which there is dialogue with the United States, in which Iran is no longer this contained, sort of neutered actor in the region, and begins to assume a bit of a greater role in the region, and Israel wants to make sure that that does not happen. Now, I think this is the wrong approach, because the promise of this deal is to actually bring Iran into the fold and begin having diplomacy on all of these problems in the region that can only be resolved if all of the powers in the region are seeking political solutions instead of military solutions.
Yes,
hopefully
yes.
That'll happen, but I think that Israel is working to prevent Iran from being a part of those processes.
Another power in the region, of course, is Saudi Arabia. They too have been opposed to a deal. Cyrus, I want to get your take. How are they trying to thwart negotiations, and why are they so opposed to Iran no longer being isolated from the West?
Yes, thank you very much. My take on this is based on almost 40 years of research and writings about the transformation of the globe, and as well as transformation of the Middle East. The question of Iran nuclear negotiation or attempt to make a bomb or whatever each parties may accuse each other is a tip of the iceberg. The question is that the main issue, if you want to really fundamentally deal with it, is that the balance of power has already changed in the Middle East and in the world altogether after the 1970s. And then the implosion or collapse of the Pax Americana, the system of the post-World War II that the United States was the hegemon. And of course, the implosion of Soviet Union, of course, was also another cause of that same process, which led to the globalization process, which now the balance of power has changed in every region of the world, including the Middle East. So if you really take that, the issue of nuclear Iran, or rather, quote unquote, I put it in that sense, would be a tip of the iceberg. The change of the balance of power means that the old world, which was under the auspices of the United States already, is gone, is already done. And in that sense, Saudi Arabia, which is connected very much with the old world, Pax Americana, is already powerless in that fundamental sense. Nevertheless, adding, sending arms and supporting directly and indirectly by the United States of Saudi Arabia is just a sort of band-aid, if you will, on this process. So in this sense, I would not surprise that Saudi Arabia is against this deal. And any other deal which would change the equation in a formal sense or accepting the change in the balance of power in the things. You have to realize also that after the Arab Springs, what happened to the Saudi Arabia and then what Saudi Arabia has done. I think Saudi Arabia is very important to be watched because the contradictory processes and then regime itself, which it seems to me would be very contradictory with the 21st century establishment, would be very important. So if you really look at the fundamental sense of what's going on in Saudi Arabia, why Saudi Arabia does not fit the region in the fundamental sense, then you know why the tip of the iceberg is also being countered by Saudi Arabia and Gulf and so on and so forth. Now, going back to the reflections in the press and then the habitual arguments that we have to arm Saudi Arabia against Iran and then creating rivals and so forth, even though the rivalry is there already, and exploiting this rivalry, it would be also adding to this and then creating more events around this issue of nuclear deal.
I'm so happy you mentioned that rivalry because we actually have a report that Reuters is reporting that a senior official in France came out essentially saying that, quote, everyone is looking at Iran with greed. It's an important market, but it's not the only one. There was a strategic decision to be made on who could face Iran as it pushes its pawns in the region. That's Saudi Arabia and Egypt. That's the choice we've made. So that was a senior French official basically coming out saying that they are going to be supporting Egypt and Saudi Arabia to be the main rivals against Iran. What do you make of that, Jamal? Who has to really benefit from creating this rivalry between these different countries?
Yeah, well, what a novel approach to back Egypt and Saudi Arabia against Iran, as if this hasn't been happening for the past 3 decades. This is just a doubling down of the sort of the strategic infrastructure of the region in which there is an attempt to balance the sort of the certain forces on one side and certain forces on the other side. Balancing the Gulf states as well as Egypt against Iran is nothing new. And this reads to me as a signal to France's friends in the region, friends with whom they have commercial and military ties, that the status quo will not be shaken by this Iran nuclear agreement. I think that it is short-sighted. I think that this deal is an opportunity to break this status quo that has led to so much of the problems in the region. And I really, given the true problems that are plaguing the Middle East right now, stateless, fundamentalist groups, I think that this represents the type of backwards thinking that will only perpetuate this problem and lead to further insecurity inside of the region. So hopefully this is just one official and not a strategy that is going to be too heavily invested in. And hopefully there will be opportunities for ending that status quo and having the countries actually, instead of participating in this zero-sum game, actually beginning to find ways to work together. But we'll see.
Yeah, Cyrus, you heard Jamal talk about the status quo and commercial interests sort of being reassured by that statement. What specific commercial interests are we talking about when we mention that it's in their interest to promote this rivalry?
I think this is. I agree with Jamal on this point. That we have seen this movie before, as they say, and this is not just grasping at straws by certain individuals in France. And I don't think that it's a good policy for the French government to really tread on this particular posture. Going back to my thesis, the fundamental thesis of change in the balance of power, Iran is not only the commercial, connected with the commercial activities, but the question is that in an organic sense, Iran is a part and parcel of the polity of the Middle East and polity of the world by implication. And in that sense, Iran cannot be ignored. Iran is the most important and powerful country in the region. Why powerful? Not because the Islamic Republic has been managing it nice and neat and so forth, far from it, but because of the objective conditions and the transformation of the world and change in the balance of power. So in this sense, the question of objectivity should be dealt with. In this fundamental sense, then the question is not commercial activities of selling arms to Egypt, for instance, selling arms, pile of it to Saudi Arabia. These are the interests of the particular group of industries which are not really congruent with the interest of the foreign policy of the United States or foreign policy of France or foreign policy of Great Britain and so on and so forth. So in that sense, I think these are the last gasps and arguments which would not go anywhere, against the nuclear deal in Iran.
All right, Cyrus Bina as well as Jamal Abdi, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.